All right, welcome back. Welcome back to my live. Thanks for subscribing to the My History Verified channel, and thank you for returning or leaving feedback in the comments section. Remember that the author of this reading material has left behind many gems for you to research further. So I hope you are doing just that in your own free time. Now, if you are new to the channel, thank you for joining us today. Please subscribe after viewing this episode. I am your quirky ASF Hood genealogist, and please go ahead and say it with me. I don't need permission to study my ancestry or the history of this world. So don't be looking for a certification on this channel. No degrees, I got them. Don't be looking for it on this channel because I don't need it on this ancestry and research journey. Okay. Now, we have completed reading all of the pages, well, the pages of chapters 1 in the first book, and today we will be reading book 2, chapter 9. Thank you all for being with me on such an awesome learning curve journey. Now, this read will not only lead us to names, people, and places, but it will also support us in the comprehension of the terminology and tasks your genealogy and ancestry research often runs into. Now, while doing so, we must also recognize the laws and the events and the occurrences of race and ethnicity that always seem to coincide with each other. And we know that both race and ethnicity led to outcomes of devastating constraints, and that they also, in one way or another, shaped the lives of our ancestors with just a stroke of a pen. We will continue our journey of the reading of this book, where the author discusses the differences between the Mexican Aborigines and the North and Southeast Coast Aborigines, pointing out the religious worship practices and rituals of the Mexican Aborigines' religious worship of their sun god and the demon of blood, which was the sacrifice of their children. Now, all of this is from the book titled The History of Ancient America Anterior to the Time of Columbus, proving the identity of the Aborigines with the Tyrians and Israelites, by George Jones, written between the dates of 1810 and 1879. Now, if you have not viewed my past video, in order to catch you up on what we're reading today, please view the reclassification of the North and Southeast Coast Amerindian taped as a live stream, because it is the beginning read for the books and the chapters already read. I hope that you follow along with me using this critical find it at the Library of Congress to help you to conceptualize the harm many of the people of the past placed upon the original land dwellers based on race and ethnicity. And they did this with a stroke of a pen, and their biases that always seems to turn into laws. And you already know those laws govern the land masses and the power and ultimately the control over the descendants of the original North and East Coast Aborigines today. I will continue to use this book reading to interpret what the author wanted the King of Prussia to know of his findings in the Western Hemisphere of America, even though he clearly did so in paragraph 1, which consists of nearly 20 plus pages of its 492 pages. It is definitely a valuable read for all, especially the descendants of the Aborigines today, the reclassified African American. Let us continue our edification of this powerful linguistics of the truth of a people, by and large, who have not yet figured out who they are or just need a reminder and sincerity, but factual validation of their feelings and knowledge of what they innately already know. And that is that this discussion often gets swept under the rug for subject matter silence. Let's move forward. I don't know why they just do not want my reading to go on, but I am still going to keep on going. All right, chapter 9, 335 through 332 BC. Azelmic, the last of the Tyrian monarchs, review of the kingdom of Tyrus, and the invasion of Asia by Alexander of Macedon, the investment of Tyrus. We have now to investigate and delineate the most remarkable siege in ancient record, not remarkable from its duration of time, but from its important consequences. The ingenuity employed in its final success, the courage of the attack and defense, and from the demoniac horrors and cruelties practiced by the conqueror upon its eventful termination. The destruction of Jerusalem by Titus was 400 years after total annihilation of Tyrus as a nation, and therefore, to the period of which we are now writing, Alexander's siege of Tyrus stands unequaled for courageous assault, heroic resistance, and for refined cruelty practiced upon the defeated. Upon this great national event is founded the essential basis of this history. It is the absolute commencement of the annals of ancient America. Isaiah, Plutarch, and Arrian are our authorities. The description of the invasion and the siege, however humble the delineation, our own. We mention this that in case it should fail to reach the full imagination of the reader, that the demeritus may fall upon the right party, or should it be the reverse, there may then be an inclination to render the opposite tribute of justice, not to the writer, but to the reader, that from the horrors of war he may turn with a Christian's feeling to contemplate the divine blessings of peace, and as a consequence, practical goodwill and deeds to all men. It will be necessary to present a review of the political and commercial position of Tyrus at the time that Alexander of Macedon, at the age of 20, commenced his victorious march from his throne in Europe through the great capitals of Asia and Africa, 336 through 5 BC. 335 BC, Ozelmac, the defeated of Strato, wielded the scepter with patriotic energy and justice at this period. Tyrus was at the very height of splendor and renown. The Queen of the Sea had extended her navigation beyond any other period of her past history, her throne being now upon the island only, which was citadeled and bastioned with the Mediterranean itself for a water moat, and that nearly half a mile in width and flowing between the mainland and the outward walls, and they proudly rising to an elevation of 150 feet. This combination for defense caused her to defy every assault from man, or even the warfare of elements. Upon the island arose her gorgeous palaces and edifices, and conspicuous above them all soared the lofty and brilliant temple of Hercules Apollo, the chosen deity of the Tyrians. In the center of the mansion of their religion stood a statue of pure and beaten gold, sacred to the glowing sun god. In the front of Apollo's image was the altar of the country, composed of precious stones and metals, of engraved and sparkling gems, sculptured gold and silver, wrought by the descendants of the Hiramic artists, whose renowned works gave extended and lasting fame to the truly sacred temple of Jerusalem. Upon the authority of the foredooming prophet Ezekiel, who spoke of Tyrus 2 centuries and a half prior to this period, her commerce, and now was of the phoenix character, and from which fact writers have traced her name of Phoenice. Her commerce and shipbuilding were as renowned as her adventurous spirit was proverbial. Even in that time, her builders had perfected her beauty. The Tyrian galleys were of peculiar strength and elegance, and their means and appliances are especially dwelt upon by the prophet. Senir furnished the fir wood for planks and decks, Lebanon the cedar for masts, yards, and timber, Bashan the oak for the powerful oars. The rowers' benches were of ivory from Ethiopia and India. The sails were of embroidered fine linen from Egypt, and the awning canopies of blue and purple cloths, tinted with the renowned color of her robes and of royalty. Mariners were constantly received from Sidon and Arvid. The important business of the caulkers were confined to the wise men of Gabal, but the builders and pilots were Tyrians only. To all the nations enumerated by Ezekiel, from whence riches were received in exchange for merchandise, are now 335 BC to be added the islands and the capitals bordering upon the Mediterranean. This Rhodes, Sardinia, Sicily, Melita, Corsica, and the Baleares, Aegina, Crete, Candia, Cyprus, Corcyria, and all the Grecian and Ionian Isles, the newly discovered lands of Britain and Hibernia, the former being named by the Tyrians, every port from the mouth of the Menander to the pillars at Gibraltar, from the borders of Dalmatia to the opposite shores of the Adriatic, from the shore of Gaul and Iberia to the harbors of Etruria, and to all these commercial tributaries of Tyrus are to be added those giants of antiquity, Athens, Rome, and Carthage. Truly, then, in the language of the inspired writer Zechariah, quote, Tyrus did build herself a stronghold, and heaped up silver as the dust and fine gold as the mire of the street, unquote. The same false commercial policy was pursued by the Tyrians as in their more ancient days, when pride and envy were their injurious counselors. Their hands were raised against every nation seeking to enrich itself through the means of navigation. Those countries were viewed by the Tyrians as the mere instruments of their own advancement. Sidon and Carthage were alone excepted from the national jealousy, and even this exception to the rule was founded upon selfishness, arising from the memory of blood and kindred, and not from any sentiment of liberal policy. The metropolis being now on the island, they felt safe from the approach of an enemy by land, while their surrounding walls rendered them quiet and secure from every assault by naval warfare as then practiced. In this imperial state of confident security founded on pride, locality, but above all by commercial monopoly, stood the island kingdom of Tyrus, as her death knell was sounded from afar by the rising monarch of Macedonia. Throughout the surrounding nations, the islanders had sown wind. They were now, as a consequence, to reap the whirlwind, and no one to check on blight the pride harvest of the hurricane. Alexander commenced his triumphant march in the year 336 BC, and not having a sufficient cause for his foreign invasions, Persia and Media accepted, may be justly looked upon at this day as the human juggernaut of antiquity. The prophet Daniel, 2 centuries before the period of which this event treats, stigmatized this vaunted hero when comparing him with the kings of Media and Persia, the latter to the horns of the ram, while the former is likened unto the brute goat of the mountains, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia. Daniel 8:21. It is not necessary to trace the progress of Alexander in Asia, only so far as it may have had, may correction, only so far as it may have had an influence upon the fate and fall of Tyrus. After the passage of the Granicus, and in the next year, the great victory at Issus, whereby the Persian kingdom was shaken. The lesser nations began to contemplate the increasing power of Alexander with alarm and to reflect upon the best means of averting impending ruin. The only alternative from battle was to become tributary or to obtain the special favor of the invader. Sidon made application through ambassadors to Alexander for his protection and was thus saved from destruction by anticipating the conflict through a tributary surrender, and which voluntary act satisfied the Macedonian, who stipulated, however, that he should place a new king upon the throne. This was agreed to, and Byblos and Aridaeus joined in the humiliating surrender. In compliment to his favorite Hephaestion, the conqueror allowed him to appoint whom he pleased for king of Sidon. Hephaestion thereupon selected a poor man of the capital by the name of Strato and instantly raised him to the dignity of Sidonian sovereign. The mendicant was a remote brand of the royal house, but had been unjustly degraded by the reigning monarch. When the new raised king had his first interview with Alexander, his grateful remark was, "I pray that Apollo will enable you, Alexander, to bear prosperity with the same fortitude with which I have struggled with adversity." Quote unquote. The Macedonian highly applauded the philosophical point of the remark and secured him in his new possession. As no great gift can be without a referential motive, either to the past or for the future, the donation by Hephaestion, where no past service had destroyed it, and there were nearer branches of the royal house than Strato must have had, therefore some deep meaning. It is only long after historic events are past and analyzed that they can be calmly or correctly judged. And in tracing Alexander's approach to the celebrated quote unquote daughter of Sidon, this donation of a throne and to the party receiving it was in direct flattery to Tyrus. As in like manner, at a subsequent period, Marcus Antonius presented provinces to Egypt to secure the sun-clad and voluptuous Cleopatra. The subjugation of Tyrus by policy was one of the schemes of Alexander. For avoiding destruction, he would then be sure of navies, pilots, and mariners to carry his warfare at a later period to the river Tiber and to Rome itself, for his thirst of conquest had not been allayed by the poison drought in Asia, could only have been quenched within the great city of Italy. Alexander therefore flattered the Tyrians by raising to the throne of Sidon a man who bore the same name, Strato, and was of the same family as the founder of the present dynasty at Tyrus, and consequently remotely related to Azelmic, whom Alexander endeavored, by this act of apparent generosity, to circumvent and overthrow by policy, not warfare. Historians have applauded the justice of Hephaestion. They should have analyzed the deep laid scheming of his master, who merely employed his favorite to mask his own deep intent upon the great commercial emporium of the world. The Tyrians, however, were practical merchant princes and were not to be deceived by any species of exchange, although kings were the commodity. 334 BC. The unforeseen capitulation of Sidon, the motherland, aroused the Tyrians to a sense of their own position. Sidon, Byblos, and Aridaeus had surrendered. These capitals therefore could not aid the merchant metropolis. To increase the apprehension of the Tyrians, it was reported through the continued policy of Alexander that he was also attended by a fleet of galleys to cover any retreat, or to land and reconvey his troops from or to any point from the Bosphorus to the Nile, or from thence to Carthage. The conqueror had, however, in reality dismissed his fleet before the victory of Issus in order to inspire his troops with additional courage. From the then apparent fact that they had no means of retreat from the enemy's country by the means of galleys, he must have remembered that that feeling of safety of retreat lost the Persians the Battle of Marathon, 490 BC. The Macedonian had another motive in reporting that his fleet was approaching, this to take the Tyrian attention from any land defense by enforcing the belief that the attack would be by means of the navy. He knew also that Ozelmic and his people had extensive knowledge of military science, for they could have no occasion for its exercise, occasioned by their island locality, their high reared walls being their bulwarks. And they consequently commenced, as he expected, preparations for a naval conflict. But unknown to Alexander, they had formed a masterly designed viz. To attack him both by land and sea, and that simultaneously, thence, if the Macedonian lost the land battle and his fleet dispersed, no difficult matter for the Tyrians. It would be easy to arouse other nations to crush the invader. Tyrus, however, had no army fit with Alexander in any general engagement, and especially with his phalanx, phalanx, and cavalry. Ozelmic therefore secretly dispatched special envoys to his only remaining ally, this Carthage, for no other nation could be with safety applied to the emergency except Sidon, for the treatment by the Tyrians to other countries had alienated every sentiment of national friendship. In their pride and prosperity, they had forgotten that adversity may come. Sidon had capitulated and received nearly an alien king. Carthage, therefore, alone remained. Ozelmic's ambassadors were received by the Tyro Carthaginians with every demonstration of respect as being due to the nation from which they themselves had sprung. The answer to the application for an army to oppose the advance of Alexander upon Tyrus could only be divulged by and within the Senate of the Republic. The envoys were, therefore, courteously dismissed with presents and honors, together with the assurance that a speedy reply should be sent to the island capital. In the meantime, the policy of Ozalmic was still further employed to circumvent that of Alexander's, for during the absence of the envoys, he endeavored to flatter the wily Macedonian in his own manner, and thereupon sent as a present to him a splendid golden crown as a friendly compliment. This was received with apparent feelings of amity, and in return, Philip's son desired to honor Tyrus by worshipping in person with his officers in the temple of Hercules Apollo. Alzamic sarcastically replied to this effect on behalf of Tyrus, viz., that the honor intended by Alexander in entering the metropolis and worshiping with his followers for his suit would have been the entire army in the chief temple of the nation was duly appreciated and more than they deserved or were desirous of receiving. That since the hero of Macedon only desired to pay his tribute of respect to the temple of Hercules Apollo, that could be done amid the ruins of the old temple on the mainland, and that from the summit of the walls of the island city, Alzamic, his nobles, and people would witness the ceremony. Alexander, of course, declined the offer, at once perceiving that his scheme of entering Tyrus was frustrated. And he also almost simultaneously with this invitation to worship in the ruined temple, received intelligence of the important embassy secretly sent to Carthage. Alexander, therefore, instantly found that he had cause to view in Ozalmic and his people foes whose forethought, consequent judgment might replace any deficiency that might be apparent from the want of an organized army. The two rival monarchs awaited with anxiety the reply of Carthage. In the meantime, to the Republican Senate, 330 BC, held the final conference upon the subject of the Tyrian solicitation, and thereupon Deputy 30 of the chief citizens of Carthage as a delegation to convey to Alzamic the following unlooked for reply, this, that the Senate reviewed with deep condolence the present and approaching condition of the home of their ancestors, but upon contemplation of the position of Carthage itself, they deeply regretted to find that it is precluded even the remote possibility of sending troops or succor to Tyrus. Thus, Carthage apparently, safe from the present approaches of Alexander, had her own fears of invasion. Yet, had the Senate acceded to the wish of Tyrus, the two nations, by forming a junction, might have successfully opposed the further advance of the enemy. But Carthage had resolved, like Sidon, to save herself by policy, not warfare. The Senate of Carthage, therefore, following the Sidonian example, deputed an ambassador to Alexander in order to secure his favor or by a tribute to remain in peace. They consequently deputed for the important and national embassy Rhodanus, a man possessing extraordinary address and beauty of person, supported by the fascination of the most accomplished eloquence, the insinuating manners, and the flattery of Rhodanus, who was presented by Parmenio, together with his gallant bearing, has such a magical effect upon the vain Macedonian that he instantly cast a friendly eye upon Carthage. Thus, that country was saved from invasion by the cheapest, yet most valued, tribute in the mind of the hero of the Granicus, viz. Flattery. Jadus, the high priest of Judea, subsequently saved Jerusalem in the same manner by producing the prophecy of Daniel and identifying Alexander as, quote, the king of Gracia, unquote, the rough goat, quote unquote, of the prediction. Rhodanus accompanied the son of Philip in all his after expeditions and consequently had power and did transmit to Carthage the plans of his new master, who had no suspicion of his flatterer's treachery. Rhodanus saved his country, and yet upon his return to Carthage, he was looked upon as a traitor from having served in the army of the Grecian and was thereupon sentenced to death. Ingratitude and barbarity carried the decree into execution. The reply of the Republic to Ozamic's application for troops cast a foreboding gloom over the spirits of his subjects. It was too late now to supplicate to Alexander and receive from him the same terms as had been granted to either Sidon or Carthage, for it was known to the invader that a solicitation for an army had been made to Carthage and refused, which point was naturally not lost by Rhodanus in his eloquent appeal, for he represented the denial as having emanated not so much from fear or hope of favor as from admiration and love of Alexander and his glory. The Tyrians were, therefore, now left solitary and alone as a majestic column in the desert of nations. They had now to depend upon their own solid base for support. Their chief weapon was their ancient pride, which was daily being transfused from the brittle character of its metal into the more pliable and useful temper of true courage, in enabling its possessor to correctly analyze and appreciate the powers of an opponent. This courage and their walled and island citadel enabled them to laugh to scorn the approach of the Macedonian, for intelligence had been received by them that his navy had been dismissed, and that the original report of its bearing down upon Tyrus was but a stratagem of the invader, quote unquote. Alexander's army now advanced and commenced hostilities by destroying the suburbs of Tyrus, situate upon the mainland, the inhabitants of which had previously entered the island metropolis. Thus was the last siege of Tyrus commenced in the 11th Hebrew month Shabbat, January through February, in the year 332 before the Christian era. This will now conclude the reading of chapter 9. Thank you so much for joining me. Oh, wrong one. Thank you. All right. Thank you for joining me. All right. This will conclude the reading of book 2, chapter 9 of the book titled The History of Ancient America Anterior to the Time of Christopher Columbus by Greg Jones, located at the Library of Congress. Please join me on the next reading of Book 2, Chapter 10.